Hi, my name is Priyal, and today I'm going to be talking about Mbeubeuss in Dakar, Senegal. Here's a quick overview of what I'll be covering today. Feel free to reference back to this slide, but we'll begin with some background information, look at some key data, and then we'll finish up with some current events and a brief conclusion. The purpose of this presentation is to provide some context about Mbeubeuss and what impacts it has on both the environment and the health of workers. And I intend on relaying this information through various charts and graphs, as well as visualizations, and I think we'll be able to see some pretty common trends. We'll also look at some current events going on. So, Mbeubeuss, what is it? It's a key component of Dakar's waste management system. It was established in 1968 and it's Senegal's largest open air landfill. It's in the Malika district. It covers around 114 hectares. It receives around 3,000 to 3,500 tons of waste daily, and it's a source of pretty significant environmental pollution and some public health concerns, which is why there's some rehabilitation efforts supported by the Senegalese government as well as the World Bank, but we will dive into that a little bit later. All right, so looking at this graph, we can see that the size of Mbeubeuss has increased almost tenfold. In 1978, it was only about 14 hectares, and by 2014, it had reached 114 hectares. There's pretty limited data on the size expansion annually, but there's clearly an upward trend since its initiation. The waste generation has more than doubled in the last 2 decades, and this is really mainly due to urbanization and population growth that has been expanding rapidly. It receives around 3,500 tons of unsorted daily waste. This comes out to about 1.3 million metric tons annually. When we take a look at what waste is actually found, we can see that 37% of it is fine waste. So this is small debris, dust, organic matter. Mbeubeuss is mainly composed of food and biodegradable materials. Putrescible waste is the next largest at around 22%. So this is food scraps, animal waste, yard waste. Plastic waste is also pretty significant. You can see 9%. This is going to pose some threats to the environment because plastic is slow to break down. Metal and glass and other materials you can see are also there in smaller quantities. This is usually recovered by waste pickers, however, and it's really that initial lack of waste separation that causes mixing of these hazardous substances and recyclables that creates this amplification of health and environmental risks. So there are some pretty severe environmental impacts. Soil tests revealed pretty alarmingly high levels of heavy metals like lead and cadmium, as well as arsenic. You can see that all three exceed EPA safety standards pretty significantly. And I've made two different graphs here to account for the differences in scale, just so you can really visualize how high these levels are compared to the EPA standards. And this is concerning because there's a lot of fires that break out, and this will release toxic air pollutants, things like particulate matter and dioxins, and this is going to then pose as a threat to the respiratory health of workers as well as the environment. So, polluted leachate will also contaminate groundwater, and then this will go into nearby wetlands. This doesn't only hurt the drinking supply for people, but also local ecosystems nearby. And then finally, when this organic waste is decomposing, methane is going to be emitted, as we know, greenhouse gas, and it's going to exacerbate climate change. So I mentioned waste pickers earlier. Who are they? They are the people that work on the landfill and collect recyclable materials like the metal and the glass and the plastic. The landfill provides a livelihood to about 2,000 to 4,000 informal workers. And you can see that a small percentage are early teenagers starting at 12 years and above. And then men are about 65%, women about a quarter. They only earn about $2 to $5 US dollars a day based on what they're recovering. Um, the concern here is there's pretty significant health risks from their day-to-day work. So they're constantly being exposed to smoke and toxic fumes since the waste is unregulated and the burning of the waste is unregulated as well as the emissions that come from it. And you can see that there's respiratory problems that happen, physical injuries happen because it's a pretty unprotected environment. There's sharp objects. There's a lot of contact with hazardous chemicals, and this can cause skin irritation. having exposure to this is going to cause some pretty significant long-term health damages. So this is a graphic I created. It's a timeline that goes over an overview of events in the past and present day at Mbeubeuss that are happening. Let's focus closer to present day. So in 2021, Promojed developed a project to sort and transfer the waste at Mbeubeuss better. It is planning to rehabilitate the landfill gradually and reduce gas emissions and decrease the leachate leakage. And this is also being financed by the World Bank. However, in 2023, waste pickers protests happened as they believe that the Promojed project is threatening their income, and evictions were happening as a result. And so this protest was really just calling for more meaningful participation in the decision making processes, just to make sure that their livelihoods are protected while the landfill is going through this restructuring. So just to recap everything, Mbeubeuss has been processing around 3,000 tons of waste daily. It's Senegal's largest open air landfill. It's crucial, but it's also hazardous. It provides a livelihood to thousands of informal waste pickers, but there's dangerous working conditions. At the same time, there's a lot of environmental effects through soil contamination, air pollution, and as a consequence, waste pickers also have various health problems. And there are government plans to try to rehabilitate the waste site, to modernize it, but there's a lot of criticism that's also coming from this as they're not being included in the planning process. These are the references used to create this presentation. Thanks for watching.